Daly suspended Elon Musk's 5-year-old son for whispering a prayer. When X bowed his head to thank God for his snack, the school called it a violation, but they had no idea who his father was or what would follow. By the time Elon walked out of that office, everything had already begun to change. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Elon Musk was in the middle of a high-level meeting when his phone buzzed on the table. Normally, he'd ignore it, but when he saw it was X's school calling, something in his chest tightened. He stepped out, answered, and heard the firm voice of Principal Winters on the line. "Mr. Musk, we need you to come to Oak Ridge Elementary immediately. There's been an incident involving your son." His throat went dry. "Is he hurt?" "No," she replied, "but it's serious." Within minutes, Elon was in his car, racing through traffic, his mind running wild with possibilities. X was only 5. What could possibly warrant this kind of urgency? When he arrived at the school, he was directed to the main office. There, just outside the principal's door, sat little X. His legs dangled from a tall chair, eyes cast downward. He looked up as his father approached, unsure. "Dad, am I in trouble?" Elon knelt beside him. "Let's find out together, okay?" They walked in to find Principal Winters seated at her desk, her posture stiff. Ms. Bennett, X's teacher, sat beside her, glancing down uncomfortably. "Mr. Musk," the principal began, "your son was observed praying aloud during snack time, then encouraging other students to join him. That's a violation of our policy." She slid a paper across the desk. "We're issuing a 3-day suspension." Elon blinked. "He prayed? And for that you're suspending him?" Winters nodded. "We're a secular school. What he did could pressure other students." Elon looked at X, confused and frightened. He stood, gripping his son's hand. "Come on, buddy," he said gently. As they stepped outside, he leaned down and whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong. We're going to fix this." That evening, after Elon tucked X into bed with a few extra stories and reassurances, he sat alone at his desk, the suspension notice lying in front of him. He read it again, his jaw tightening. A 5-year-old punished for quietly thanking God for his food? Elon shook his head and opened his laptop. If the school claimed X violated policy, he was going to read every word of it. He pulled up Oak Ridge Elementary's official handbook and began reading, line by line. Hours passed. He highlighted inconsistencies, copied relevant sections, and opened tabs to cross-section federal guidelines on religious freedom in schools. As the night deepened, so did Elon's frustration. Their justification didn't make sense. That's when he found it. Buried in a footnote under student rights and responsibilities, students may voluntarily engage in prayer or religious expression, provided it is student-initiated, not disruptive, and during non-instructional time. Snack time, non-instructional, no disruption, and student-initiated. Elon sat back in his chair, heart pounding, not in fear, but in clarity. They hadn't just overreacted. They had violated their own rules. The quiet whisper of a child's prayer had revealed a systemic failure. Elon clicked open a new document and began outlining his case. This wasn't over. It had just begun. That night, while X slept peacefully in the next room, Elon sat alone in his home office, the soft hum of electronics barely masking the thoughts racing through his mind. He wasn't just angry. He was resolute. He thought back to his own childhood in South Africa. His mother had taught him to think for himself, and his grandfather had taught him to stand up against anything that felt wrong, no matter how powerful the opposition. That same principle was at the heart of what he tried to pass on to X. Curiosity, courage, and gratitude. Those were the values they spoke about often at home. Whether it was wondering how the stars hung in the sky, or why it was important to say thank you before meals. Elon encouraged his son to ask questions and feel deeply. Now, that very gratitude had been labeled a violation, and Elon couldn't let it stand. He picked up the phone and called Sarah Martinez, a respected education attorney he had met once at a policy event. Her reputation was impeccable. Fierce, precise, and known for cases that centered on students' rights. After explaining the situation, Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll clear my afternoon," she said. "Bring everything you've got." Before hanging up, Elon turned to his assistant and gave a simple instruction. "Cancel the rest of my week. This takes priority." A few hours later, in a quiet corner of a private law office, Elon and Sarah reviewed the school's policy, recent Supreme Court rulings, and Elon's meticulously compiled research. "This is a strong case," Sarah said, impressed. Elon nodded but remained focused. "I don't want headlines, I want resolution. And if we have to go to court, we will. But first," he paused, eyes narrowing, "we'll give them one chance to do what's right." 2 days after the suspension, a formal letter signed by Elon Musk and attorney Sarah Martinez landed on the desk of Oki Elementary's school board. The message was direct, respectful, but firm. It demanded a meeting with the full board, citing multiple violations of school policy and federal law. The requested date was set for Thursday afternoon. The board agreed, reluctantly. Behind closed doors, murmurs rippled. This wasn't just any parent. This was Elon Musk. But Musk had no intention of using his name as leverage. He wanted truth to speak for itself. The conference room was full when Elon and Sarah walked in. Principal Winters sat stiffly at the head of the table. 7 board members, including Chair Dr. Philip Jensen and longtime educator Mrs. Rodriguez, were already seated. Elon wore no tie, no pretense, just determination. Sarah laid the documentation neatly on the table. Dr. Jensen opened the meeting. "Thank you for coming. We've reviewed your concerns and want to hear them in full," Sarah began. "We contend that X's suspension violates Oak Ridge Elementary's own student rights policy, as well as constitutional protections regarding religious expression." She slid copies of the handbook across the table, highlighting the clause that allowed student-led prayer during non-instructional time. X prayed quietly during snack. He didn't disrupt class. He invited no one until another child asked what he was doing. Principal Winters interjected. With respect, he influenced others. Several children followed his example, which could have alienated students from different backgrounds. Elon spoke softly but clearly. If a 5-year-old saying thank you makes others feel alienated, perhaps we've misunderstood what school is supposed to teach. Ms. Bennett, sitting quietly until now, spoke up. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just said, "I'm thanking God for my food. You can if you want. That's all." Sarah handed out statements from 3 other parents whose children had been at X's table that day. They corroborated Ms. Bennett's words. "There was no disruption," Sarah said. "Only a moment of shared gratitude, student-led, peaceful, and protected by law." Principal Winters crossed her arms. The teacher asked him to stop. He didn't. And if a child had quietly recited a poem or sang to themselves, Elon asked, would that be grounds for punishment too? A pause. No answer. Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward, scanning the documents. "Margaret, were these accounts verified before the suspension was issued?" Principal Winters hesitated. "We went by the teacher's initial report. No follow-up with the other children involved?" Mrs. Rodriguez pressed. "No. We didn't see the need." "You didn't see the need," Elon repeated gently, "because you assumed what he did was wrong." Tension spread through the room. Dr. Jensen adjusted his glasses. "We need a brief recess," he said. 15 minutes. As the board stepped into a side chamber, Elon remained seated, eyes steady, heart quietly burning. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. X hadn't broken the rules. He'd revealed them. Outside the glass doors, reporters were gathering. But inside the boardroom, the real verdict was still being written. When the school board returned from their closed-door session, the room settled into a tense stillness. Dr. Jensen, ever the careful voice of reason, took his seat and folded his hands. After reviewing all presented materials and witness statements, we've come to a unanimous conclusion, he began. The suspension issued to Musk was in violation of school policy and the constitutional protections afforded to all students. There was a subtle collective exhale across the room. Even Principal Winters, for the first time that afternoon, looked less defiant and more subdued. Effective immediately, the suspension is reversed, Dr. Jensen continued. All records of the incident will be expunged. Furthermore, we acknowledge this situation has revealed shortcomings in how we interpret and apply policies related to religious expression. He glanced down, then back up. We owe X, and you, Mr. Musk, a formal apology. Elon nodded but did not smile. I appreciate that, but this isn't about my son anymore. It's about every child in this school who feels uncertain about expressing their beliefs. Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. What would you like us to do? Elon took a breath. X is afraid to return. He thinks he did something wrong by praying. He told me he might get his friends in trouble. No 5-year-old should carry that kind of fear. He paused before continuing. One apology won't fix this. We need something lasting, something educational. Like what? Dr. Jensen asked. Start with a school-wide education initiative, one that teaches students and staff about religious freedom, cultural understanding, and the value of respectful differences. Bring in voices from multiple traditions: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, atheist. Let the children learn that it's okay to be different, and it's more than okay to ask questions. A silence fell again, but this time it was contemplative. Principal Winters shifted in her chair. Would you be willing to help design such a program? Elon exchanged a glance with Sarah Martinez, who gave a subtle nod. Yes, I'd like to be involved, but I want parents and teachers to help shape it too. This should be a community effort. Mrs. Rodriguez turned to the board. I support this fully. Let's build a curriculum that protects rights and builds understanding. Dr. Jensen looked around. Every member gave a slow, affirmative nod. Then we have a path forward. But as Elon left that meeting, hand in hand with Sarah and holding a folder full of change, one question lingered in his mind. What would happen when X walked back into his classroom? The suspension was over. The policies were changing, but the heart of the school, the children, the teachers, the culture, still needed to face the moment that had been created. And that moment was coming with the morning bell. X clutched his father's hand as they stood in front of Oakage Elementary, the same building where just days ago he was sent home for a quiet prayer. The morning air was crisp, but Elon could feel the tension in his son's small fingers. Kneeling to meet X's eyes, Elon placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You did nothing wrong, he said softly. You were kind, respectful, and thankful. That's never something to be ashamed of. X nodded slowly, but Elon could tell the fear was still there. Together they walked toward the classroom door. Miss Bennett stood waiting, visibly nervous. Her smile was forced, her eyes uncertain. Next to her was Principal Winters, now a far cry from the stern figure in the office days earlier. Behind them, Dr. Jensen observed quietly, there to ensure that things would be different. Good morning, X, Ms. Bennett greeted him, her tone softer than usual. We're glad to see you back. X said nothing. He turned to Elon one last time, who gave him a confident nod. Then, with a deep breath, X walked into the classroom. Principal Winters followed him inside and gently asked for the students' attention. "Class, I want to say something very important," she began. "Earlier this week, I made a decision about X that wasn't fair. He wasn't in trouble for being bad. He was simply saying thank you before eating." X looked up at her slowly. "So, I'm not bad?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper. Principal Winters hesitated, then knelt to his level. "No, X, you are not bad at all. In fact, what you did was kind and thoughtful, and I'm sorry for not seeing that right away." A few students exchanged glances. Others looked toward X, unsure. Then one hand raised. "Can we still be friends with X?" X looked to his classmates and nodded. "Of course." Mrs. Bennett watched, her heart tight. Something was shifting, subtle but real. One girl in the back raised her hand. "My grandma prays before meals too. Can I do that sometimes, if I want?" Mrs. Bennett swallowed. "If it's quiet and respectful, yes." The children started asking questions. Some wanted to know what prayer meant. Others asked about different traditions. X listened, surprised by the curiosity. One boy leaned over and whispered, "I think it's cool you talk to God." By recess, kids from other classes were quietly gathering to share what they did at home. Some prayed, some shared good thoughts, and others simply listened. No one was forced. No one laughed. They just shared. Miss Bennett watched the unfolding scene from her desk in quiet awe. For the first time, she realized this wasn't disruption. It was discovery. And it started with one boy who dared to pray out loud. She turned to Dr. Jensen and whispered, "Something's happening here, and it's beautiful." At lunchtime the next day, a quiet hush settled over the cafeteria. Not from fear, but from focus. Something was different. Where there had once been chatter and clamor, now pockets of stillness formed across tables. Children bowed their heads briefly, some whispering soft thanks, others simply pausing in thoughtful silence. And at the center of it all sat X, smiling calmly with his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't directing anyone. He wasn't commanding attention. He was just being himself. But his small act of faith had become something much bigger. It had given other children permission to explore what mattered to them. At one table, Michael closed his eyes and murmured a short prayer in Spanish. At another, Jaden stared at his lunch and quietly said, "I'm thinking about the good parts of my day." No adult had told them to do this. No rule had changed. But a space had been made, and children were stepping into it, each in their own way. Even those who didn't pray seemed moved. A girl with braids folded her napkin and said, "I like this. It makes lunch feel peaceful." Her friend nodded. Like we're all thinking the same thing, just differently. Ms. Bennett stood near the edge of the room, holding a clipboard she hadn't glanced at in minutes. Her eyes were fixed on the students. She watched as quiet turned to curiosity. One girl leaned over and asked, "Why do you say your prayer with your fingers like that?" He shrugged. "That's how my grandma taught me." None of it felt forced. It didn't divide the room. If anything, it brought a surprising sense of unity. Ms. Bennett walked over to Dr. Jensen, who had come to observe. She tapped his shoulder and said, "The kids are teaching each other. It's beautiful. I never expected this." Dr. Jensen nodded. "It's what happens when you lead with understanding instead of fear." That afternoon, Elon pulled up and stepped out of his car. X ran to him, beaming. "Dad, Michael prays in Spanish, and Jaden doesn't pray, but he thinks happy thoughts so he can feel thankful anyway." Elon knelt to hug his son. "That sounds wonderful, buddy. Did you feel okay today?" X nodded. "Yeah." Miss Bennett smiled a lot, and the other kids asked me questions. We even talked about Diwali and Hanukkah and Christmas. A girl named Aisha said they celebrate Eid, and her dad tells stories about prophets. It was awesome. Elon stood up, arm around X's shoulders, and looked at the school. He watched other children walk out with the same lightness in their steps. This wasn't just a victory for X. It wasn't just a moment of justice. It was a movement. A reminder that the smallest acts of prayer, honesty, kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could have planned. Elon listened carefully, his hand resting on X's back. "That's what makes the world beautiful," he said. "Different voices, different prayers, all carrying the same hope." Inside the school, more teachers began to take notice. Conversations were starting, not just among children, but among staff. What began as one small boy's prayer was now igniting a school-wide reflection on inclusion, belief, and belonging. And in that moment, Elon realized something personal. This wasn't about one child, or even one school. This was about a culture learning to breathe again. As they walked to the car, Elon looked up at the sky and thought, "This is bigger than Oakage. This is just the beginning." Sometimes it takes a child to remind us what matters most. Truly. One week after X returned to school, the energy at Oakage Elementary had shifted. No longer was there tension in the air. There was conversation. Where silence had once been enforced, now dialogue blossomed. The school board, moved by what they had seen and heard, officially formed a new committee focused on cultural and religious inclusion. Elon Musk agreed to join, but not as a voice of dominance. He chose instead to listen, taking in the stories from families who had long felt invisible. The first committee meeting was standing room only. Parents from every walk of life, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, agnostic, filled the library with stories they had carried for years. One mother spoke about how her daughter was told to remove her cross necklace. A father recounted how his son had been told not to mention Ramadan in a journal entry. Another parent described a child being mocked for bringing traditional Korean rice cakes during lunch. For the first time, these stories weren't met with awkward silence. They were received with compassion. Miss Bennett attended as well, her voice trembling slightly as she admitted, "I didn't realize how much we'd been discouraging expression in the name of neutrality." By the end of the evening, the committee had unanimously agreed to draft new school-wide guidelines. The foundation of the new policy was simple: inclusion, not fear. It protected each student's right to respectfully express their traditions and beliefs without judgment, shame, or disciplinary action. To celebrate the start of this new chapter, the school announced its first Cultural Heritage Day. Students would be encouraged to bring something from their tradition, whether a prayer, a story, a food, or a song, to share with classmates. What had once divided them was now becoming the very thing that brought them together. That night, Elon tucked X into bed. The little boy was already drifting off, his arm curled around a drawing he'd made of his friends praying, laughing, and eating together at school. Elon leaned down and whispered, "You changed the world today, buddy." X didn't respond, but a sleepy smile spread across his face. And in that quiet, Elon knew some revolutions begin with the voice of a child simply saying, "Thank you." That night, after the committee meeting and the heartfelt stories shared by dozens of families, Elon Musk stood alone on his balcony, staring up at the stars. The air was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles only after something meaningful has happened. He knew this battle was over, for now. But what had started in one kindergarten classroom was already beginning to ripple far beyond Oakage Elementary. News had spread quickly. Other schools in the district, and even some across the country, had begun reviewing their policies on religious expression and cultural inclusion. Parents were asking more questions. Teachers were rethinking old assumptions. And it all started with one small boy whispering a prayer over his snack. Later that night, Elon crept into X's room. The boy stirred slightly as Elon pulled the blanket up to his shoulders. His voice, sleepy but clear, broke the silence. "Was it worth it, Dad?" he asked, eyes still closed. Elon paused, his hand resting gently on his son's back. "More than you'll ever know, buddy." He stayed there a moment longer, watching the peaceful rise and fall of X's breathing. Then he turned off the light and whispered into the quiet room. "Sleep well, world changer." Sometimes the greatest revolutions don't begin with loud protests or public speeches. Sometimes they begin with the quiet voice of a child choosing gratitude over silence. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey of courage, conviction, and truth. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us faith, truth, and courage still matter. Because in a world that often forgets, one voice, one small act of integrity can light the way for many. And sometimes it all begins with a simple prayer.